Today, we are going to quickly build out a GraphQL API using the @GraphQL repository annotation and query by example. That's right. If you're not new around here and you're a returning subscriber, thank you, by the way. You remember in the last video, we take a look at query by example and when you might want to use it and where it really comes in handy. So we're going to kind of put those two together today because I got a question from a friend here in the Cleveland area asking me how to build out a GraphQL API using query by example. And so I thought I would take some time and do that today. Well, friends, if you are new around here, I enjoy writing, and I have a couple places that I do some writing. First off, over at danvega.dev, you can learn a little bit more about me there. I have a blog and a newsletter, so if you're interested in that, if you're interested in Java and Spring and software programming in general, this is a good place to be. I've also started writing about AI, so if you're interested in just general AI, learning some of the terms and topics and what's going on in the world of AI, this is a really good newsletter to subscribe to. Okay, so here is the repository that we're going to go through today. We're going to build this from scratch, but I want you to have this so that you don't have to follow along. Just kind of sit back, relax, watch, kind of learn through osmosis. This repository will be there when you are done. Now, it also has a lot more information in it, a quick overview of it. More importantly, I like to start with the why. Why query by example? This kind of shows you that it can significantly simplify dynamic querying in your application. So today, the application that we're going to build is kind of just like a book manager, but you can imagine this for any domain. Hey, I have these three fields, title, author, and published year, and I want to search on some form of those. I may just want to search on a title, maybe a title on an author, maybe a title, an author, and a published year. Some of those could be required. Some of those could be contained. Like there's a whole, even with just three fields, there's a whole bunch of parameters that we could take in to kind of build that query out. So there's showing one traditional approach without query by example, using a predicate here. And you could say like, if title's not null, go ahead and add this. You can also build out different methods in your repository. So find by title, find by author, find by published year, and then you see. This is a little bit of an extreme example, but you get the idea, right? I'm sure you have seen some of this in some of your repositories. When you start to have all these different custom methods in your repository, this gets a little bit overwhelming, right? So with query by example, we can just create a simple interface. We'll extend the query by example executor. We'll annotate it with GraphQL repository. We're off and running. Like this gets us up and running really, really quickly. And so you'll see some of the benefits of QB, reduced boilerplate. We get some type safety, flexible querying. We get this GraphQL integration, which is really nice, maintainable code, and dynamic queries. So with that, we're going to build a project together. Head over to start.spring.io, choose Java and Maven. I'm going to say dev.danvega. We'll call this GraphQL QBE, and we'll use JDK 23. The dependencies that we're going to need for this. I'm going to use Spring Web, Spring for GraphQL. Now I'm using Spring Data JPA. You'll use Spring Data JPA as well. I'm using Postgres. If you don't want to have to like set up Postgres or set up Docker, if you don't have Docker desktop running, you could easily use something else for this. You could switch this out for something like H2. But I'm using that. So if you are doing that, you're going to use the Docker Compose support, which will automatically start the container for us when we start up the Spring Boot up. So make sure you have Docker desktop running if you're going to follow this, and the Spring Boot dev tools. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and click generate. This will download a zip file. I can open this up in any IDE or text editor that I want to. I'm going to open it up in IntelliJ Ultimate Edition, but please feel free. I always say the best text editor, the best IDE is the one you're most productive in. So go ahead and download that, unzip it, and open it up in whatever text editor or IDE you're most productive in. And with that, I think we have everything we need. Well, let's write some code. All right, so here we are in the application. Nothing special going on yet. The first thing we want to look at is the Docker Compose file, though. I'm actually going to paste some different properties in here. I'm going to call the DB GraphQL books. The username is user, password is password, and I'm exposing 5432 in case we want to go ahead and take a look at the database locally here on my machine. The next thing we'll need to do is throw in a couple of properties here. So under resources, properties, I'm going to paste these in here. So we want to enable the graphical user interface. That's how we kind of test out some of these queries against the API. And then we're using Spring Data JPA. I want to create and drop every time we start this application, because again, I'm just going to kind of load some dummy data. And I'm showing the SQL just so we could see that verbose in the console. So with that, I think our setup is done. And what we want to do is kind of start with the schema. When we create a GraphQL API, we are very much doing this from a schema first approach. So I'm going to start with the schema. So I'm going to come into GraphQL. I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call this schema.graphqls. And here's where we'll begin to type out our schema. So I'm going to say type book. In the book, I'm going to have a field called ID. This is of type ID. I'm going to have a title. We'll say string. And again, that exclamation point is just to say that it's required. So I'm saying string for author as well. And then I'm going to have a published year, which is going to be an int, and that is also required. So now we can go ahead and add some queries. So I'm going to say type. Let's type the correct words, Dan. So type query. So I want one for books, and the books query is going to take in a book, but we can't use this. So if you followed me in the past, or you understand, you've been through GraphQL APIs before, you know this is an output type. We can't use this as an input type to our query. So we'll need a input type for that. So I'm going to call this book input. And book input is going to have a title. Actually, it's going to have these three. Let's just go ahead and copy those. So there's our book input. And now we can take that in as input to this particular query. This is going to return a collection of books. And that looks pretty good. And then we can have one more. We can say we want to be able to find a book by its ID. And that is ID, and that will return a book. Cool. So that is our schema. That's all we're going to do. Now, the reason we're doing this is because we want this books query to be pretty dynamic, right? We want to be able to take in a title. Maybe we want to match just a little bit of the title. Maybe we want to take in a title and an author, or a title, author, and publish year. We want this to be flexible. And so again, if you go back to the README, and that is in the GitHub repository in the description below. If you go back to that, you could see like how you have to start to build that out to be that flexible. So we're going to look at an alternative to that today using query by example. Now, to make this work on the Java side, I'm going to need a new package. So let's go. Actually, let me I don't like this. Refactor, rename. Yes, all directories. Let's just call this QBE, right? Yes, refactor. Okay. So now over here, I'm going to create a new package. I'm going to call this book. And inside a book, we're going to create a couple things. The first one that we're going to create is a record. Actually, no, we're going to create a class, because we are using Spring Data JPA here, and JPA entities cannot be immutable. You need an all args constructor and that no args constructor. So let's take a look at this. We'll create a new entity type book. So it's going to have that ID, which is the @ID annotation, and we're just generating a new value for this. And then we have our title, our author, and our publish year that matches up with the schema that we created before. So we have our no args constructor here. We are taking in all args here. Here's our getters and setters and our toString. Nothing fancy going on here. The next thing I'll need is a interface. And this will be the book repository. So let's go ahead and create that. So let's say Java class, book repository, and this will be an interface. And then this is going to extend a couple of things. First, the JPA repository. So we would have done this in the past. We would say book, the type is long, and that gets us a lot of methods out of here, right? We're able to go ahead and delete, get one, get by ID, find all. We can pass in an example. Again, this is kind of query by example stuff. But those are the only two methods that take in examples. So what I want to do also is extend the query by example executor, and this just takes in the type. In this case, this is book. So this gets us a bunch of more methods. So we can see find one, find all. We have some different overloaded methods for find all. We can count, exist, or find by. So we have a bunch more methods here. So extending those two interfaces gives us a whole bunch of methods. Now, what we would have done in the past is we could use this in this repository in something like a controller. And we'd have to set up all the different mappings for all the different methods that we wanted to support. But what we can do now is we can just come in here and say at GraphQL repository, and this is going to do some of those things for us. Specialization of the repository stereotype that marks the repository as intended for use in a GraphQL application for data fetching. So this is eligible for auto binding to queries whose return types matches the repository domain type. And again, this is setting up data fetchers for our particular queries in our schema. So when we have a data fetcher like books or book, we are automatically mapping them to this repository. So this is really helping us out, cut down on some boilerplate code, get something up and running really quickly. Now, for this to work, we're going to need some data, right? So I want to create a new data loader class that is going to insert some data for me. So I'm going to say data loader. And what this is going to do is going to implement the command line runner. This is so that it starts up after all of the configuration is done, all of the dependency injection is done. We have all of these things available to us. So we have to implement that one method. We will in a second. But we want that book repository. So we want to say book repository. We'll call it repository. We'll get that through constructor injection. And that now is available to us. So I'm going to paste a whole bunch of books in here so we don't have to type these out. But these are, let's do this. We got to make this a component. And now we should start to see some of this. There we go. And now that is good. So these are a bunch of books. We see our good friend Mark Heckler here, our good friend Thomas Vitale, Lors, Craig Walls, all the friends are here in our books. We have a lot of books that we can go ahead and take a look at now. So this is going to run and load up all these books in the database. So what we should be able to do is go ahead and test these things out. Now, again, remember, I haven't written a controller method. Normally, you'd have to come in here, write a controller method, map those queries that are in the schema to some type of data fetcher in your controller methods. But because of that GraphQL repository, we're going to get that out of the box. We don't need to manually write those, which is really great. If this works, who knows if this is going to work or not. So let's go ahead and try this. Let's see if we can get this up and running on the first shot. Do me all a big favor, cross your fingers. Let's see if we can get this. Oh, I knew it. Something was wrong. So I didn't have Docker running. Need to have Docker running. So go ahead and make sure that is running. So let's try and run this again. Okay, Postgres is pulling, downloading. That's looking better. Again, this is a brand new machine. That's why this may take a second on the first one. And we see a whole bunch of inserts. So if we wanted to, one thing we could do is we can come in here and take a look at the database. Again, we have our, this is the DB name. So we can come in here and say, let's connect to Postgres. And this is user password. I think I typed that wrong. And then we are on port 5432, so this should test okay. Ooh, download driver files. Again, brand new machine. So we are having some fun getting all the things to work on the first try here. So if we look at that database, there's a book table and there's a bunch of books in there. So no surprise there. Our SQL is working. Now what we can do is go ahead and head over to the browser and go to that graphical user interface and test out some of these queries. All right, so if you go to localhost 8080 graphical, this will take you to the graphical playground. Again, we enabled this back in the properties. You need to enable this. It's disabled by default. We don't want anybody to just go ahead and be able to view this. But nice little playground for kind of writing, validating, testing out your GraphQL queries. If you go back to the README, I have some queries that you can go ahead and test out. So the first one is books. Hey, I just want to get a list of all the books. I don't want to filter by anything. So let's try that out. If we go ahead and run that, we see all of the books in our system. So far, so good. Again, didn't write a data fetcher for this. This is happening automatically for us. Let's go ahead and query a book by its ID. So we can go ahead and do that. Give me the first book, which is Mark's. Excellent book, by the way. If you've never had a chance to take a look at it, definitely recommend it. What else can we do? Now we get to start to querying books by example. So what I'm going to do here is say, so here's a book. Here is the input type of an author whose name is Craig Wells. The published year is 2022. So if we kind of say, here's an example of a book, I want you to go ahead and find me one that looks like that. Let's see if we can do that. Argument book with value, Craig Wells. Is missing a required field. I was just thinking this through while I was doing this. So here we don't want these to be required, right? Because we might pass some combination of these. We might pass just title and author, in this case, author and year. So we don't want those to all be required. So here's that. Craig Wells and 2022. Let's see if my data is correct. My data may not be correct. So let's see. Craig 2018. Do I not have the updated one? All right, let's do that. And there we go. So now we can go ahead and look for that. Do we have more than one Craig book in here? We do not. Do we have any author that has more than one book? I mean, I know some of our friends have written lots of books. Guess just bad job out of me not getting something with more than one book in there. But you can go ahead and add another book and use the same author, and you should be able to find more. So that, I think, is really all I wanted to show, because again, you can do any combination of this now. So if I wanted to just find a book by Cloud Native, so if we come over here and go back here and say title, and again, we get that nice IntelliSense sys. There we go, Cloud Native Spring in action. So, yeah, I guess that's really all I wanted to show. I got a question on like how to do this. And really, again, we start with the schema first approach. We start with the repository. This gives us that functionality out of the box by extending JPA repository and query by example executor. I think in the final code, if you want to take a look at that, yes, I do believe I have some in here. I have a bunch of tests. So if you want to go ahead and check these out, if you go in source test book, here's some integration tests using test container. So that was fun. So if you want to add test containers to the project and go ahead and use this, this will allow you to write some tests against it. And I think we have some more examples of how to like query, how to like send different arguments to this query. So a lot of fun going on here. But I hope that was helpful. Again, I got a question on how to do this. Like, hey, I want to get a GraphQL API up and running. I know there's this query by example thing that will help me cut down on some of this. How do I kind of prototype something out really quickly? And I think this is definitely a solution for doing that, and a lot of fun. And again, anytime I don't have to write code and I'm just going to let Spring kind of write that for me, I don't need to write those data fetchers in a controller, just extra code that I don't want to write. We can always come back and add to that later. In fact, you can add a controller and add your own methods if you have something that doesn't kind of map to that repository, and that works out well too. But hey, I thought this was a lot of fun to put together. I learned something during this, so I hope you did too. I love learning. I hope you love learning. If you do and you are not subscribed to this channel, what are you doing? What's going on? What's taking you this long? If you're not, do me a big favor. Leave me a big thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel. And as always, friends, happy coding.